Before you start the process of modelling your service, please ensure that you have carried out the following: that you've read the supporting user guide, that you've read the Welcome tab on the model, and that you've orientated yourself to the populated example. Please ensure that you've engaged with both information and operational staff who are involved in the service, and that you agree on the underlying assumptions you have made in generating the data. Finally, ensure you are familiar with the copy and paste special values method. This is very important. This model does two things. It allows you to understand the variation in weekly demand and compare this against your average weekly capacity, and it calculates an estimated ideal waiting list size and compares this against current waiting list size. In doing this, it allows you to understand how much capacity you need to provide to keep pace with demand, also allowing for variation, and how much additional capacity is required to clear an excess waiting list size if the current waiting list is too big.
We will begin the video tutorial with the Welcome tab. The Welcome tab provides some initial notes regarding the purpose of the model, data items that are required in order to generate results, basic assumptions that underpin the calculations used within it, and its limitations. At the bottom of the sheet, there is a list of the tabs within this workbook, with a brief description of each tab next to it. Looking at the requirements, you will need up to 52 weeks of DTA data, the current waiting list size, and optionally, the waiting list size for each week over the period covered by your DTA data. You will also need an understanding of the number of patients removed from your admitted waiting list for reasons other than treatment, or ROT. And finally, you'll need capacity figures for your service. It's important that the data you enter is an accurate as possible representation of your current service, so please ensure that you select a period which will reflect this. In terms of the limitations of the model, it's important to note that, as with any model, this workbook represents a numerical approximation of real-life events, so please be careful when interpreting the results. Anything that's produced by these models needs to be sense-checked against operational experience. Discussing the implications of the outputs with operational staff is an excellent method of sense-checking, as such staff will frequently be in tune with what's happening. Finally, a few general tips. Always begin with a blank template. These worksheets are complex, and it's easy to overlook minor changes which may affect the final output, so downloading a fresh template at the start of the process is highly recommended. Check any tick box and slider positions in data entry boxes before proceeding. This worksheet uses a system whereby sliders that are set to the extreme right will pull values from previously completed data tables. Sliders that are set anywhere else are effectively inputting the data directly without considering historic information. The input boxes will highlight when this occurs by providing the historic value in brackets. As with any Excel workbook, the tabs can be moved around to suit the user, and blank tabs can be added as desired. We would recommend that you use the Notes section or add a blank worksheet to record details of any assumptions you make in the process of extracting the data that will populate the sheet, as well as any information regarding what you are using the outputs for, as this will assist in keeping track of your thought processes as well as version control. If you find yourself comparing particular tabs regularly, then moving the tabs to make them adjacent may also be a helpful action.
Ensure that you are capable of extracting the data items needed to populate the model. You will need up to 52 weeks worth of DTA data, which should be as accurate as possible reflection of the current service. You'll need the current admitted waiting list size and, optionally, the waiting list size at the end of each week for the period covered by your DTA data. You'll need an understanding of the patients removed from your waiting list for reasons other than treatment. This is also known as your ROT rates. And you'll need your inpatient service capacity. Clearly define the questions you want to ask, and make sure that all staff involved in the process have a thorough understanding of the terminology being used. This model provides an approximation of real-life events, and the results must be sense-checked with operational staff. To ensure that you're capable of using the model, please begin with a blank template, check tick box options and slider positions before starting, use the existing notes worksheet or add a blank worksheet to record your assumptions, information such as what you'll be using the outputs for, and to keep track of thought processes and version control. Please also move the tabs around as you find most convenient, because once you start, this is your model.
We will now move on to the Demand tab. This worksheet provides you with the option to enter the name of your trust and your specialty. Either select from the drop-down options or type the text manually. Text that is entered or selected here will be reflected in some of the charts that we'll see later on in this video. There are two main data items that are entered on this sheet: historic request data and the current waiting list size. The number of DTAs made by your service is entered on the table on the left, and you will also need to enter information on the number of patients removed each week from the waiting list for reasons other than treatment, or ROT. The current waiting list size is entered into the box in the top right of the sheet. The number contained in this box should be the latest waiting list size for patients both with and without a TCI date. This value will change weekly and should be updated every week while working through the process to populate the model. This is important as it will allow you to make a comparison of the ideal or maximum sustainable waiting list size against the most current reported waiting list size for your final signed off version. Or to put it another way, regularly updating the waiting list values will allow you to compare your current waiting list size against the calculated maximum size as part of your service management process. We'll now go to the SPC tab, which will be used to check the information entered in the Demand tab. The SPC tab is a helpful way of visualizing the request information you entered under the Demand tab. SPC stands for Statistical Process Control, and a chart such as this is used to assess whether a particular process, DTAs in this case, demonstrate a level of variability that's in line with what would be expected from a statistical viewpoint. To put it another way, the chart helps you to see if there are any outliers in your data, or if there are any unusual patterns in your demand. There may be points highlighted with a red tag, as visible here. These highlight instances of what is called special cause variation, that is, variation that is outside of the expected norm. The tag shows two numbers. The top indicates the type of special cause variation, and this model allows for 4 types, which are listed here. The bottom number on the tag indicates the week in which the event took place. It's worth noting that an instance of special cause variation does not automatically invalidate your dataset. There may be reasons that justify an especially low level of requests, for example. Public holidays such as Christmas are an excellent example of this. When looking at the information on this tab, it's worth considering the following points about the request data. Is it reasonably representative of what you expect to be seeing in the future? Are there any ongoing trends, upwards or downwards, that you expect to continue into the future? Are there any instances of special cause variation that may be indicative of issues with your data or processes which may bias the information you've entered? Check any highlighted points and ensure that you can account for them. If there are significant changes in the level of DTAs that occur partway through your reference period, or if there are indications of an ongoing trend in the pattern of DTAs, then there are some ways to adjust the inputs to account for this. A word of caution, however. If you are inferring trends from your data that suggest significant changes from the current levels of demand, make absolutely sure that these trends are real and not due to reasons such as data quality or seasonality issues. Actual step changes in the level of DTAs tend to be very rare. The saying of extraordinary claims requiring extraordinary proof is applicable here. With this warning in mind, the split function allows you to chop the left-hand side of the data off and base demand calculations on the right-hand side of the data only. In summary, DTA data and waiting list sizes are entered on the Demand tab, and the demand data can be then visually assessed for anomalies on the SPC tab.
The Data tab is where historic DTAs, ROT, and waiting list information are entered. Keeping the waiting list figures up to date on a weekly basis to ensure that the final sign-off version is based on the most current reported waiting list size is recommended. The SPC tab provides a visualization of the DTA information. This will allow you to check your data for unusual patterns of behaviour, which may indicate data quality issues or other process issues that require further investigation before proceeding. Key points to check on the SPC tab are: is it reasonably representative of what you expect to be seeing in the future? Are there any ongoing trends that you expect to continue into the future? Are there any instances of special cause variation, that may be indicative of issues with your data or your processes. These may bias the information you have entered. Check any highlighted points and ensure that you can account for them. If you do take trends from this data, then you must be absolutely sure that the trends are real. Investigate and check them.
The Capacity tab allows you to enter up to 75 lists and their associated capacity under the Core Capacity table. This table allows you to enter a description of the list, provide additional details in the text, as well as the number of admissions per list and the frequency with which the list runs. There is a second table next to the core table where you may enter additional capacity. This would be capacity that you anticipate taking place that lies outside of your day-to-day lists, such as weekend working, waiting list initiatives, and so forth. Below the capacity tables are the historic activity tables, where you can enter the activity that took place over a 52-week period, split by core and additional activity as per the capacity tables above. The upshot of having these two sets of tables is that users can view their demand and capacity balance against their expected capacity, or compare it against what activity took place the previous year to see if that was sufficient to meet existing demand. Note that you can access the historic activity tables using the link at the top of the page, and return back to the top of the page via a second link next to the historic activity tables. The capacity values can be switched between capacity and historic activity tables using this box. As a word of warning, be very clear about what question you want to ask and what your data sources are before you read the summary tables, as it's easy to toggle the switch and take the wrong figures. The selection boxes at the top of the page allow you to either pull the capacity values from the data as entered or input them directly using the sliders. Please note that, as before, values derived from the tables are presented in brackets if the slider is not set to the far right. Obtaining an agreed measure of capacity is frequently a point of significant challenge in the demand and capacity process. This will often be due to a number of factors. For example, capacity being changed reactively to meet demand requirements, or lists configured in particular ways due to historic reasons that may not otherwise make much sense. A good example of this would be historic profiles on paths that have been worked around and not updated. Gaining a clear idea of the capacity of your service will often be beneficial in and of itself, as it may highlight processes and data that could be improved as part of the capacity assessment process. It's worth reviewing the findings from this page with operational staff. Consulting with booking staff is an excellent sense check, as they will frequently have a good feel for what's occurring on the ground and can confirm if the figures are a reasonable reflection of what's going on. It's worth noting that any significant changes in capacity, for example opening a new list, will require a review of the information on this sheet to ensure that it returns operationally relevant results. Although the first iteration of the capacity assessment process is frequently a long and resource-intensive effort, subsequent iterations are generally much easier, as issues uncovered from the first round are resolved and lessons learned are applied to the setup of future clinics.
The Capacity tab is where you enter the capacity for your theatre list in minutes. The Capacity tab allows users to enter their anticipated capacity in two ways: by using the core and additional capacity tables, which will calculate the values based on the aggregation of capacity figures, and by using historic activity, which will compare historic activity against expected demand. Note that there are two different questions here, so please be careful and clear on which you think is most relevant to your needs before proceeding. Having an in-depth understanding of your service's capacities is a major benefit of going through the capacity assessment process. Although this may be initially a laborious process, it does return significant dividends in the long run.
We will now look at the Parameters tab. The data boxes on this tab allow you to adjust the metrics used to drive the demand and capacity calculations, as well as set the pathway timeframes for treatment in weeks for both urgent and routine admissions, which will affect the ideal waiting list size calculation. Please note that this is a stage of treatment model and that the times selected must be from the time of the decision to admit within the patient pathway, not from the RTT clock start. Note that the mean DTAs box and the ROT box can draw from the historic data entered under the Demand tab to calculate their respective values. The remaining metric, the proportion of cancer or urgent admissions, will need to be generated outside of this model.
The engine of the model. where the various metrics that are used to calculate the demand figures are entered. There are also a number of variables which are entered directly into the model here. These are the proportion of cancer and urgent admissions, and you can also set timeframes of treatment for urgent and routine patients here.
The Summary tab is where all of the information entered thus far is brought together. Generally speaking, there are a few cells which can be used to provide a reasonable indication of the balance of demand and capacity. The 65th and 85th percentile of demand less ROT, and the total available capacity. Ideally, you want your capacity to lie somewhere between 65th and 85th percentile of demand. Secondly, you will want your waiting list consistent with delivery of care and the current waiting list size. As a note of caution, the values provided here are estimates. The degree of intervention required to rebalance capacities or waiting list sizes is a matter of operational judgment. The maximum sustainable waiting list value should therefore be viewed as a guide rather than a hard limit. Finally, this area chart represents the capacity demand figures graphically. Demand adjusted for ROT is shown as the line, while the capacity is shown in orange, while additional capacity is shown in green. The summary page therefore does exactly what it says and provides high-level metrics to show the balance between capacity and demand and the sustainable waiting list size against the current waiting list size.
The Summary tab does exactly that. It summarises your information. There is a lot of information contained in this tab. However, only a few of these cells are required to gain an idea of the demand and capacity balance in your service. To determine if there is sufficient capacity to deal with what's coming through the door, look at your average week capacity compared against the 65th and 86th percentile of demand, minus your ROT rate. To determine if your waiting list size is a sustainable size, compare it against the waiting list consistent with delivery cell. Unless otherwise specified, using the switch on the sheet, all figures provided on this page will be in points and not patients.
The Backlog Clearance tab allows users to add or take away capacity in the future and see the expected effect on the waiting list size. This allows for scenario planning of, for example, waiting list initiatives, or to proactively plan around known reductions in capacity. As with many of these tools, a note of caution. The model assumes an even distribution of activity and capacity. The waiting list trajectories are therefore based on the interaction between average demand and average capacity, which will not happen in reality. These trajectories are purely illustrative and intended to give an indication of the likely timescales for recovering an ideal waiting list size. They should not be used to guarantee the exact date by which the ideal waiting list size will be achieved. The progress of the service can be measured against actual activity by entering the actual activity in this table below. The results are reflected in the Graphs tab. The projected trajectories are visible here for scenarios entered. Going from top to bottom, the first chart is a simple replica of the SPC chart in the SPC tab. The second chart shows the effect of the backlog clearance sheet against the waiting list size. As stated before, this is a highly idealized trajectory shown here as a straight line, which almost never occurs in real life. Any data entered on the actual activity on the backlog clearance sheet will also be shown against hypothesized outcomes for comparative purposes. The third sheet is similar to the demand and capacity chart on the summary page, although you should note that this shows unadjusted DTAs against capacity. The final chart is a representation of the spread of demand. The mean and the 85th percentile are shown against an idealized demand curve. Please note that the curve is not generated directly from the historic data, but uses calculated metrics to generate a theoretical distribution curve, and this is really for interest only.
Use these tabs to scenario plan with your future capacity and see the effect of increasing or decreasing your capacity on waiting list sizes. Do note though that the trajectories won't take account of variation and assumes an even spread of activity and capacity, so it should not be used to guarantee timescales or, for example, specific waiting list size reductions.
The final tab we will go through is the Calculations tab. This is non-interactive, but is driven by data entered in the Demand and Parameters tabs. The purpose of this tab is to show the calculations used to estimate the maximum sustainable waiting list size. For those of you who have attended the one-day theory course, this is the tabular representation of the party hats game. As a quick summary, this tab shows the average routine and urgent DTAs received per week, distributed evenly among the weeks specified for treatment in the Pathway tab. There are a number of patients who are removed from the waiting list via removals other than treatment, or ROT, and the total number of patients remaining in the system are cumulatively added, the final figure of which provides the maximum number of patients who should be waiting at any given moment. If all of this doesn't make much sense, don't worry too much, as this is simply meant as a demonstration of the calculation method. Understanding how to use the outputs is more important in this instance.
So don't worry if this tab doesn't make much sense. Understanding your data and how to use the outputs is much more important. For more information on the work of the Demand and Capacity team, please go to our website www.england.nhs.uk/our-work/demand and capacity. Please contact us with any feedback on this training series at england.demandandcapacityproject@nhs.net. Thank you.